done today is tried to give you a talk that covers a whole range of issues that are hopefully interesting to those of you from whatever subject area you're ultimately going to study. And I've organised the talk in a similar way to which I would organise a lecture that I would give to students at the university. So this is sort of what you might expect in at least the environmental science, some of the social science type areas. And what I'm trying to do in this talk is to combine insights from environmental science as well as social science. So we're trying to bring two different worlds together in a way to understand a whole bunch of complex issues. So what we're going to talk about is this question of balancing regional development, or development more broadly, and how we manage the environment. So in this talk, I'm going to cover three main points. The first thing I'm going to talk a little bit about is why would we look at this thing called regional development and environment at once? Why would we not treat them separately? And then I'm going to give you a case study. And a case study is just an example, is where we look at a particular place and the sorts of things that are affecting that particular location. And I'm going to take you to an environment that I would suspect probably 99% of you have really no insight into. And then I'm going to finish off by addressing how do we somehow balance out regional development, economic development, and a more sustainable environment. So the first thing, of course, when we're talking about regional development is, well, what do we mean by a region? It's usually just a spatial area. It's a piece of geography, effectively. And it's really just an area that's defined by administrative boundaries. So it could be a province or a district. It could be a biophysical region. So it could be, for example, an area that is characterised by tropical rainforest or characterised by a particular catchment system, river catchment system. But typically what we mean when we talk about regional development is areas at the subnational scale. So places that are smaller than the nation. So the province, a district, and so on. Now development, we could have a whole course on what is development, what does it mean? And I suppose historically, development had really been about improvements in economic performance. But that's been debated a lot by economists and social scientists and others. So often the focus was on improvements in GDP, gross domestic product, or increases in levels of personal income, or reducing unemployment. So very economic measures. And so the question really is, does economic development always necessarily lead to social development? And the answer, of course, is no, not necessarily. So we have lots of examples around the world where economies have grown very, very quickly, but in fact, inequality has got worse. When we talk about regional development, we usually talk about development, but in a geographical context. We're interested in why some places are doing better than others, and why some places have different characteristics to others. So of course, the next step is to say, well, how does any of that relate to the environment? And it does in really complicated and interesting ways. And of course, development really, in many respects, hinges upon the use of environmental resources in one way or another. So I've said there in the top point, human existence demands on the consumption, is dependent on the consumption of natural resources. So if you look around this room, for example, we have a wooden table. We've got light that's being generated presumably by coal or natural gas or something else. We have, carpets on the floor that are made from cotton or wool or synthetics. Everything is from some natural resource somewhere. So all of the development that we see around us is usually contingent upon or reliant upon the use of natural resources in one way or another. The biggest problem, though, I think, is that the logic of economic development has focused on extracting wealth from nature. So from our forests, from mountain ranges, from the oceans, and so on, we extract wealth from them to create all of this around us. So the constant focus is always to unlock wealth. There is a question, of course, where that wealth accumulates, and much of that wealth, as we know, accumulates particularly in cities and in built-up areas. And of course, you can see the implications of this right across Southeast Asia. So if we just look at this map of Southeast Asia, we can see, for example, coastal Philippines, serious water pollution from cities, erosion and ship traffic have reduced fishery, the viability of fisheries, loss of forest in Malaysia, erosion issues in parts of northern Southeast Asia and so on. And you're all familiar with this story, right? So the story of significant environmental change in your region, and presumably you've all witnessed this across Indonesia, where there have been major environmental changes as a result of economic development, or the pursuit of economic development. And it's difficult for us to criticise that, isn't it? Because ultimately we all want to improve our well-being, our standard of living, our income and so on. But on the other hand, it's creating a series of environmental challenges or problems. So somehow we need to be able to enjoy both worlds. Have our cake and eat it too would be the saying that I would probably use. So in other words, we can enjoy not only the benefits of a good lifestyle, but also somehow manage our environment in a sustainable way. So I'm going to give you now this case study. And a case study, as I said, is really just a series of examples or a set of insights from a particular place. When we look at a case study in the university, what we're really trying to do is say, what does that case study tell us about bigger issues? What can that case study tell me about Indonesia, or Malaysia, or China, or Fiji, or some other place? So we never do a case study just because it's interesting to know about that place. We're always doing it because we want to learn about the bigger issues that it tells us something about. So what I'm going to talk about for the next little while is about the relationship between deforestation, so the loss of natural vegetation, in order to develop an agricultural environment, because I think it provides a really good case study in the challenges associated with managing the environment. And across the entire world, we've really seen major transformations to environments in the pursuit of agricultural development. So in trying to achieve agricultural development, what we've done is radically changed our environments. We've removed forests, we've diverted rivers to irrigate, we've dammed rivers, we've done all sorts of things to try and feed our population, which is, of course, a very worthwhile aim, isn't it? It's to ensure that we have sustainable food. But at the same time, it's having environmental implications. And so we need to be aware of how we might balance that out. So agriculture has changed the environment, but it creates jobs, it creates wealth, it generates food, provides livelihoods for families, and all of those benefits that that industry brings. So the example that I'm going to give you is the southwest of Western Australia. So that's basically the area that I'm going to talk about. You've got Indonesia sitting up here. Here is the capital, Perth, down here. And I'm really going to be talking mainly about this area in the southern, southwestern part of the state. So this is sort of the major agricultural belt, if you like, of Western Australia, and one of the most important food producing areas in Australia, in fact. So we'll talk a little bit about the significant changes that that has experienced. Up until the 1890s, so until very, very recently, most of that area was just bushland, forest. And I'll show you some pictures of what it looked like in just a moment. But Western Australia was a very isolated place, a long way from anywhere, and was desperate to try and find means of developing its economy. And it saw the future really in being agriculture. So agriculture was going to be the thing that increased jobs, increased wealth, raised the standard of living, and provided economic security for the future. So from the 1890s, the government of Western Australia went on an enormous development push. It did everything it could to try and increase agricultural production through that area, and I'll show you how in just a moment. And as a result, of course, though, you turn this area of what was once bushland and forest into an agricultural landscape. So much of the environment looked a lot like this in the southwest of Western Australia. At the top here you have really rather beautiful forest. It's called Jarrah forest that produces beautiful timber, this wood. It's a really dark red mahogany type timber. This is a relatively high rainfall zone here, which would be to the west near the coast. And as you move east, the vegetation thins as the rainfall drops, and you end up with this sort of much more open forest. So these trees with the white trunks and so on. This is in a much lower rainfall area, but the landscape looked much like this up until the 1890s. So you take a forest landscape and then try and turn it into an agricultural landscape. So you take a forest and you turn it into this. And effectively this is like a prairie. This happened, this removal of vegetation, over the space of only about 30 years. So they're very, very large scale operations with very low labour requirements. So they're very mechanised, highly technological. One of those 10,000 acre farms, hectare farms might only require at various points 3 or 4 people to look after the entire property. It's largely grain production. Livestock production is a bit more intensive. So it starts really with trying to, as I said at the start of the talk, harvest nature. So harvest the trees for their economic wealth. So the Jarrah trees from those forests were cut and used for building materials both in Australia but also in Europe. So much of the wood was exported to Europe for building materials to begin clearing the land for that agricultural system. You can see it was a pretty laborious process of moving these huge trees through the forest, getting them to the cities and to the ports. But all of the while, what this is doing is creating economic growth. So all of those people that you've seen in these images had employment because of this industry. So they were able to feed their families, and that was contributing to economic growth, obviously. And as time goes by, the forests are removed at a faster and faster rate. This has also been burned afterwards to get rid of the undergrowth and so on, and so it's ready for agriculture. Now, this photo was taken, I think, about 1917 or 1918, so this was going on 100 years ago. But those of you who studied some aspects of environmental change in Southeast Asia, this is not that different, is it, to slash and burn type agriculture and the rapid clearing of forest for. So this is where we use a case study, because we're saying actually this is, in a sense, looking at the same sort of issue and probably the same sorts of problems. So, of course, what happens from this is you've lost biodiversity, you've created a problem in terms of erosion, and I'll show you some issues there. So when it rains, the soil washes away, and so on it goes. One of the really big industries was sandalwood, and so sandalwood grows naturally in Western Australia. And so that was exported by, well, I'll show you on the next slide. It was put onto trains from these areas. This is all of the wood stacked up at a port, and most of that found its way up into Southeast Asia for making into incense and so on. So huge, again, extraction of wealth from natural resources. So these are really interesting kind of images, and slightly disturbing as well. So here you have this bulldozer which is working its way through the forest. But typically there would be not just this bulldozer, but between, say, me and the back of the room and maybe a bit further, there would be another bulldozer with a chain connecting the two. And you see this is a huge metal ball. And so the two bulldozers will work their way in a line through the forest and basically knock all the trees over with this chain and ball and leave a landscape that looks like the bottom. So you can see the pace of change picks up. It gets even faster and faster and faster as technology improves. And all of this, though, it's a very destructive process, but it was achieving its objective, and its objective was a single-minded focus on creating a sustainable economy. Now, it wasn't sustainable, we'll come back to that in a moment, but the whole objective was on creating an economy that would underpin the wealth and success of Western Australia. Now, governments provided enormous amounts of money and support to allow this process to happen. So basically they were providing loans to farmers,
They were providing land nearly free on the condition that you cleared it. So if you took a piece of land, you had to clear the environment, but all the while creating economic growth, creating jobs, creating opportunities. The big industry that was created was the wheat industry. So the wheat industry was really the pillar or the backbone of the agricultural economy. These are the bags of wheat that have been produced from those transformed landscapes. Very productive environment, very successful at wheat growing. These were loaded onto trains and exported off, typically to Europe. Now, this is what you create. So the environment, remember the very first photos that I showed you of the forest. If we look at a remote sensing image from space, this is it here. This is a remnant of forest here. As we move east, this is all the cleared land. So you can see here there's a square there, that's one last nature reserve or a little piece of forest. There's a little bit there. And see that straight line there? So that's a thing called the rabbit-proof fence. And there's a kind of a nice little story about that. Hopefully I can tell it right. But basically, rabbits are not natural to Australia. They were introduced by early settlers on the eastern part of the country. But of course, the rabbits bred quickly, as rabbits do, and they moved slowly westward. And so the government at various times built fences to try and keep the rabbits out. But of course, every time they built a fence, the rabbits were already on the other side of the fence, so they were too late. But anyway, development was taken out to this particular line here, which was one of those rabbit-proof fences. And the idea was that you couldn't really farm any further out this way because the rainfall was too low. There was another area that was developed here on the south coast, you can see that, which is... So I always look at that and think it's an enormous scar, really, across the landscape. Really quite striking when you see this is another national park here and so on. Now, it's sort of obvious to state this, isn't it, that you can't turn an environment from being a forest into an agricultural landscape in 30 years or 40 years without having some huge environmental impact. Part of the problem of this Western Australian case is that the policymakers had very good intentions. The intentions were we would develop the economy, we would create economic opportunities, we would create jobs and so on. But the problem was their thinking didn't take into account that the environment has natural limits. You can only change the environment so much until it sort of comes back to create a problem. So one of the main issues is that the economic thought didn't take into account the natural environment. Much of the classical thinking in economics didn't take into account the fact that natural resources have limits. It assumed that you could just continue to extract wealth from nature without there eventually being some limit. The other thing is that what I've described here is the intrinsic value of nature. Now, intrinsic, I don't know whether that's going to be an IELTS word for you or not, but intrinsic just means that it has value that's just essential to itself. So the environment is important because we know it's good. You know, it has biodiversity values, creates clean water, clean air. It looks nice, it makes us feel good and so on. So it doesn't necessarily have a financial value, but it has something that we know is good about it, is important about it. More recent thinking in economics has started to realise that you can't continue to extract value from nature forever. And so one of the things, if you were going on to study environmental science or natural resource management or something, you learn a lot about is the different ways economists are now approaching this from a policy point of view. How do you somehow balance out the possibilities around economic development while at the same time managing the environment in a more sustainable way? I think there were some other things here. It comes back to the point that I made right at the start about how we measure development. The classic approach in Western Australia was to measure economic development in two ways. Export earnings, how much money did we earn by selling our wheat to the rest of the world, and GDP. It doesn't capture the full story, does it? Because we've changed the environment enormously, we've contributed to an awful lot of economic growth and development, but it hasn't necessarily given us the full picture. It hasn't really taken care of all of the various other expenditures that we need to put into place to try and sort out the problems that we've created. So we haven't always been able to really take account of the effects of environmental degradation. So what did we do in Western Australia? Well, the sorts of things that you would probably expect. So one of the most significant early impacts was the erosion of soil. So you remove all of the vegetation, water flows down the slope, finds its way into fine crevices in the soil profile and begins to wash it away. And so we've created an agricultural landscape, but we've then lost part of it to erosion. Okay, so some of it's been washed away. We've also had wind erosion. So this is a tree stump. So the soil must have been about here somewhere once, and then the tree grew up, and it's all been blown away. So all that soil has been blown away by the wind because the soil's been exposed to the forces of nature. And you can see the same thing down here. So here's a row of trees. The environment's been completely changed. There's no vegetation. And you can see here the sand has blown. You can see where it's hit the trees. You can see those little tails that come off of those trees. The sand that's built up on the other side, or the gullies that are built on that side. So erosion has been a particularly significant issue. So trying to fix that is not cheap. So we've created economic wealth for a period of time. Then we've damaged our environment, so we can't use it for farming now. And now we've got to try and fix it. The other major problem is what we call soil salinisation. So soil salinisation is a complex process, and I'll try and describe it as simply as I can. So this is salt. So think of salt that you put on your food. Okay, that's that white stuff that you're looking at there. This is salt that goes on your food. And you see that there's salt sitting on the top and everything around it is dead. The landscape in Western Australia, the environment is very, very old. Okay, so hundreds of millions of years old. Every time it rains, rain forms around small dust particles or around little grains of salt and so on. Okay, so every time it rains, there's a little tiny bit of salt that is often landing on the ground. And what's typically happening is the water goes down into the soil, and then the trees use up that water. Okay? So there's always water down in the soil. It's called the water table. The water table is just water that sits beneath the soil profile, and it's being used up by trees. So trees are pumping water out of the ground, but the salt is sort of trapped in the soil profile. So when you cut the trees down, guess what happens? It rains, rain goes into the soil, but there's no trees anymore to use that water up. So the water table rises and it comes through the soil profile. And as it comes, it brings all that salt back up with it. So when you remove the trees, you've taken the pumps away that used to use up all that soil, the water's come through, and all of a sudden you've got this salt that eventually hits the surface. So this will be a low-lying area, and the salt has just risen to the surface through the water table. And it has an enormous, nothing really can grow in this stuff because not only is it salty, it also has a very low pH, so it's extremely acidic. So it's basically got a pH of about 3.5 to 4.5. So those of you who are scientists in the room and are interested in chemistry, you know it's sort of like battery acid. And so again, you can't grow crops in it, you can't have sheep or cattle on that land, but also it destroys the last trees that are remaining in the environment. So not only do we have a significant environmental problem, we also have significant social change, social, demographic and cultural change in these environments. So these are just some examples here. This is just an old farmhouse that's been abandoned. Presumably the farm was bought out by the neighbours. You know, you've left this, you know, so partly your fault, right? So you left a bit of a problem. Here's your shop. That's not looking so good anymore. It's closed down. And you can see the old petrol pump there, and the shop's closed down. You know, you've left town. This used to be the school teacher's house. So you've left town, and that's now abandoned in town. And you all used to play tennis together. And this is the old tennis courts. And you can see the trees are growing through the tennis courts. because they're no longer being used. So it's a story where not only is the environment under stress, but communities are under stress as well, which is a challenge. And as I said, the point of a case study is to ask you the question, can you think of similarities between the story I've just told you and what you might see in Southeast Asia? Now, as I said, I'm no expert on Southeast Asia, but I would ask questions about deforestation for agricultural development in Southeast Asia, the traditional slash and burn type agriculture and its environmental impacts. At least in reading the literature, aware that as a result of these sorts of things, there are major challenges with soil erosion, soil health and loss of soil biota and so on as well. Desertification is a major issue, loss of biodiversity. I don't think salinisation is a very particular issue, you won't have that issue necessarily. But significant environmental changes driven as a result of much the same sorts of objectives as in West Australia over the last 100 years. So there are interesting sort of parallels about the underlying causes of environmental change. I suspect the community dimensions of change are different because the cultures are different. So maybe there are different cultural aspects there that mean that we can't translate that necessarily, but you know more about that than me. Maybe it's not that. One of the most significant responses has been to begin to understand the issues around sustainability, understanding that environmental sustainability can't be seen in isolation. But the other thing that's really come to the fore is that there is a need for local people who are involved in these practices to be part of the solution. So farmers themselves needed to take responsibility for their land, for their environments, and begin to address the problems. So this is kind of consistent with things that often come out of the development studies literature and development practice around participatory development. So some of you would be aware of this kind of idea around making sure that people on the ground are part of the solution rather than having governments tell people necessarily what to do. So there's a greater focus on sustainable livelihoods and this notion of integrated environmental management. So that environmental management isn't just about technical solutions. You can be the best hydrologist in the world, you could be a fabulous environmental engineer, be able to come up with all the technical solutions to these problems and issues, but unless people accept them and farmers are willing to invest in those technologies and think that they're important, you're not going to succeed. So there's a recognition that you need to understand the whole package, the whole context, rather than just individual aspects of the problem. So let's just go back to West Australia. What was the response? The response was, and this happened across Australia, was a program called Landcare. Landcare emerged in the 1980s, and it was really about farmers taking responsibility for their own land and trying to care for it and restore it. So it's a movement that was focused on farmer participation in restoring their environment. It also focused on trying to somehow balance that drive for economic development with environmental concerns. So farmers started to realise that they couldn't keep farming their land really hard, they couldn't keep destroying natural vegetation, they couldn't keep just extracting wealth from the landscape. They had to start to balance out economic returns with managing their environment, or otherwise there was going to be no future. A really important part of this was the idea of integrated catchment management. Now, integrated catchment management simply is about understanding the environment as a big system. So the idea of integrated catchment management is to say, well, actually we can't manage the landscape farm by farm. We need all of these four farmers to work together to manage that catchment, manage that hill slope and all those streams. So unless these people work together to plan their environment, to plan their responses, it's all a bit of a waste of time, isn't it? Particularly for the person at the end. So there was a need for greater cooperation because environmental systems don't really respond to property boundaries or administrative boundaries. They're just environmental systems that cross over all of those sorts of things. There was also a recognition that local knowledge was important. So farmers knew a lot about their environments. Scientists could come in and do research and could tell you a lot about the hydrology, the geomorphology, the soils and so on. But in fact, farmers knew more about their landscape than probably anybody. And also understanding behaviour. Why do farmers behave the way that they do? Why do farmers work together on some issues and not on others, and so on? And all of this was really about understanding the environment from what we call a systems approach. Understand that everything is connected to everything else. You can't start separating out the soil from the biota, the economic aspects from the environmental aspects, the social aspects from the economic aspects, and so on. So it was all about that. So farmers started to really work together a lot. So they started getting together and a group of farmers planning their response to environmental problems. After pulling out all of the trees, planting trees, so trees went back in the landscape, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a moment. Lots of focus on education, so farmers were often engaged in better understanding issues around salinisation and biodiversity and so on. And they invested a lot in careful management of their farms and planning of their farms along environmental grounds rather than simply along economic productivity grounds. So a lot of focus on farmers working together collectively to try and solve their problems. So here, for example, we've got an old agricultural landscape and it's all being returned to trees. You can see these furrows here. They've got trees planted all the way along them because it was an area under threat. The trees that are being planted though are species that can then be used for furniture or for wood pulp, for paper. So farmers are now not just farming crops, they're saying, well, let's farm trees instead. So they're getting the agroforestry. And of course the agroforestry helps deal with biodiversity issues, if it's done well. It helps deal with the erosion issues, it provides an economic return, all of those sorts of things. And down the bottom here is a good example of that, where a farmer has this large area of land and has planted trees in the middle of his field. That does a number of things. Firstly, it provides biodiversity. Secondly, it provides an economic return when this is ready to harvest. And that can be, trees can be planted in there again once that's harvested. It provides shelter for stock. It provides protection from wind erosion. So when the wind is running across that landscape, the wind hits those trees and sort of slows down a little bit, and so you get wind protection on the other side of those trees. So a range of benefits of just integrating things like trees into landscapes. You can see here as well, this is a hill slope. The hill slope is running this way. So this is downhill. You can see the dams there to collect water. And these are tree plantings along the contour. So those of you who read maps will know what a contour is. It's basically a measurement of the slope. Well, these are planted around the slope, and you can imagine why. So when water is running down these, rather than washing away all the soil and gathering more and more speed, the water is stopped by these, directed into the dams, and you planted trees behind them as well to add to biodiversity and potential resources and so on. So the response has been a really quite significant one over the last 30 years to try and change the landscape and try and figure out ways of balancing those economic development concerns by integrating the environmental attributes, if you like, or assets into the landscape. Other sorts of things that are going on are similar. These are a local species of bush. They're planted on an old paddock. They're harvested. They're put into this machine. This machine generates electricity from the processing, but also oil from eucalyptus trees. So it generates electricity, eucalyptus, and a thing called activated carbon, which is used in filters and things like this. So again, this is put out into a rural area. It's a source of income generation. This particular plant here produces a number of products. It employs local people, and it's a more sustainable way of operating in that landscape, which was obviously under significant stress. So this whole land care movement really took off. 1989 was declared the decade of land care. It was integrated into national and state environmental policies, that there would be a whole range of responses to these environmental problems. There was a lot of money that was provided for local remediation and restoration. And about 4,000 of these small groups of farmers formed to try and tackle environmental problems. So it was a really big response across Australia. And the idea was replicated. This is the Australian motto for land care. It was recognised on one of our coins some years ago. The United States picked it up as an idea and implemented it, and it's been implemented in lots of other places since. The thing is about that, many of you might be interested in the field of international development or development practice and those sorts of things. Most of these ideas have actually, they're not new, they've been around in development studies for 30, 40, 50 years about participatory involvement in environmental management and so on. So again, this is where this case study is useful in terms of saying, well actually, there's not anything that's particularly new that's gone on here. It's really a set of well-established ideas that happen to have played out in a developed country instead of a developing country. There are lots of really interesting examples from Southeast Asia of massive environmental change, but followed by really positive community response, or examples of local grassroots environmental projects and responses. So, I think one of the things that we would encourage you to do after a lecture like this at university would be to say, think a little bit about how does this apply to your particular context, what lessons can be learned, what can't be readily translated. What we would normally do after a lecture like this would be to go away and work in small groups. So I would have set the scene. You would have a case study or two from different places that you would work on together. We might even, I run a course a little bit like this, where we go out to a rural area and we look at the farms themselves. We go out to those communities and get to see what they're really like, rather than seeing them just through a series of slides. And you begin to hear from the people on the ground and so on. So the lecture format that I've just given you is really about just a way of getting you some broad understanding of the issues, and then you would look at these in much more depth. Well, thank you everybody for coming along. I hope you found that interesting, and then you got something out of it, and maybe saw some interesting pictures at the very least of somewhere else. So good luck with your studies, and hopefully we'll see you one day in the future.